When you give your SME storyboard to your instructional designer or ID, they're going to transfer your content to a different storyboard, like the one you see here. This is an example of a storyboard for a lesson on courtesy lights inside the cabin. And as you can see, the instructional designer storyboard looks a lot like the SME storyboard. It just has a couple of more elements on it. And in this video, we're going to go over what each of these elements are. It's really important that the SME knows how to read an instructional designer storyboard because you're going to have to review it for technical accuracy. So let's start up here at the very first page. The first page of your instructional designer storyboard is the lesson specifics page. It looks just like the SME's lesson specifics page, just with a couple of more fields on it, like this lesson description field. The next page is the Developer and Graphics Notes page. This is something that the instructional designer uses to communicate special instructions to the graphics team or the courseware developers who actually build the lesson. This is not something that you really need to pay attention to as a SME. The next page is the reference material. Your instructional designer will copy any reference material instructions that you have on your storyboard directly over to this one, so everything here should look the same as what you've got if you've got any reference material. And then we start getting into the content pages after these first three pages. So let's take a look at each of the elements on this content page. Up here at the right, you're going to have a page title. When you are reviewing the instructional designer storyboard, just make sure that the page title is technically correct and accurately matches the content. Over here on the left, we've got graphic instructions. This is a lot like the SME graphic instructions box, but you'll notice that the instructional designer's graphic instructions will usually be a lot more elaborate. When you are reviewing the graphic instructions, you just want to make sure that they are technically accurate, that the instructions are describing the graphic changes that you need to see accurately and appropriately. Underneath that, we've got a blue box for additional audio tracks. If we want to have some kind of audio or like an oral alert or something like that, we can identify those right here. So if we've got that, these will just be some kind of MP3 files over here. And underneath that, we have got the narration and the learning objectives. So your instructional designer will copy the learning objective and the information where the content came from directly from your storyboard. You'll probably notice that the learning objective is stated a little bit differently than what you have in your storyboard, and that's okay. We've got to follow a pretty specific format for writing lesson objectives, and also we use special verbiage for that. Underneath that are three types of narration. So let's go over each of those. The narration text is what the student is actually going to read on the screen. This should pretty closely match what you've got on the SME storyboard. However, it may look a little bit different because your instructional designer is going to finesse the language a little bit and the sentence structure. We need to make all of our narration conform to some instructional design standards that we've got. Underneath that is the narration audio, and this is what the courseware developer will copy and paste into our audio generation tool. It should pretty much match or mirror what's in the narration text. However, in the narration audio, you could see some pretty interesting spellings because a lot of times we need to spell out certain acronyms or terms phonetically in order to get the audio generation tool to output them correctly. So for instance, if you have got the word ICAS in your narration text, in the narration audio, it's going to look like this. That's the way that we can get the audio generation tool to read it correctly. Underneath that is the timing audio. This is where we indicate when actions and interactions should happen. So let's move up here to the action box right up here. Up here on the right, the green actions box is where we describe the interactions and the timed events, such as arrows flying in or highlights appearing or when graphics are replaced by another graphics. We also describe when the user interacts with it. So if the user is going to select a switch and then something happens, all of that gets described in this green actions box right here. And we identify each specific action with a bold number. That bold number gets copied down here to the timing audio, and that is how we indicate when that action should take place. And then of course on the blue area here we have got the graphics. A lot of times the graphics will look very similar to the graphics that you had on your storyboard. However, your instructional designer may add some things to it. They may add some arrows, they may add some highlights, they may add some drawings like these red circles. They can also add text boxes. They can also add additional graphics, and sometimes your instructional designer may find a more appropriate graphic than what you had, so they could actually look different. When you review your the graphics on your instructional designer storyboard, you just want to make sure that the graphics are technically accurate. Another thing I wanted to point out are these black boxes here. These are actually really important. These black boxes indicate that there is a comment from your instructional designer. Your instructional designer is going to use these comments to ask you questions and seek clarification, and you are going to use the comments to answer them. So whenever you see a black box, that means your instructional designer has a question for you. So to open up to see what the comment is, it's really easy. You just click on this, and the comments pane is going to open up over here on the right. There's another way you can do it too. You can click on the word review up here, or the menu item review, then click show comments. Whoops, I just made it go away. There we go. So here I've got a comment for, or a question for my SME. Are the two spotlights circled in red the courtesy lights? And I'm referring to these guys right here. So when my SME wants to answer me, they'll just simply type in this field here, yes, they are. And that's how you do it. Click the red post button, and now I've got my answer. Now you can also put a comment to your, or a question to your instructional designer in the same way. Just simply right click on an object or on the slide itself, select new comment, and type your question here. Be sure to click the red post button so you can close it out. So just be aware that whenever you see these black boxes, it means that your instructional designer is asking a question for you, and you want to use these comment features to answer them if at all possible. It's a lot easier to get your questions answered this way as opposed to creating a separate document to answer questions. And there is one more thing that I want to show you. Your instructional designer is also going to include knowledge checks. These are not really quizzes, and they're not really assessments. They're simply a way to engage the learner and help the learner gauge their level of knowledge and comprehension as we move through the lesson. Your instructional designer will typically insert a knowledge check after each major concept that's discussed. So we have a couple of different types of knowledge checks we can use. One of the most popular is a standard multiple choice. And in this case, what we're going to have is a reference image that relates to the question. It'll be on the blue area here like this. In the graphic instructions, it just sort of names the graphic. The question itself is always down here. So when you're reviewing your instructional designer's storyboard, you want to make sure that that question is accurate, it's technically correct, and it makes sense. Now underneath the question for a multiple choice, a text-based multiple choice knowledge check, the answer choices and the feedback for each answer choice is listed down here. The answer choice itself is in regular font. The feedback is bold font. So we're always going to, for incorrect answers, we're going to provide feedback as to why the answer choice is incorrect and have them try again. So these knowledge checks are going to be a forced correct answer. So that means that the student has to keep selecting an answer choice until they get the right one before they can move on. So when you are reviewing your ID's storyboard, just make sure that the answer choices make sense. Even the incorrect ones, they should make some kind of sense, not be totally ridiculous, and that the feedback makes sense as well. Another type of knowledge check we have is a graphic choice. In this case, you've got your question down here, but the answer choices are going to be images and they're going to be placed on the blue screen right here. And then the feedback is right underneath them in bold. And we usually put it in white just because it's a lot more visible. So the feedback for this is incorrect, and then it says why it's incorrect. You can have as many, you can have, gosh, I think up to 8 answer choices. Typically we have like 3 or 4 answer choices though. So when you are reviewing these, just make any kind of knowledge check, just make sure that the question makes sense, that the answer choices make sense, and that if we've got a multiple choice text-based answer, that the reference image makes sense in the context of the question. So when you're going through your instructional designer storyboard, the things you want to look for is make sure that that page title matches the content that's on the slide, that it makes sense. Definitely check the graphics on the page, make sure that those are technically accurate. Your instructional designer is usually going to include a lot of labels. Make sure that the labels are technically accurate and everything is spelled correctly. Go through the graphic instructions, make sure that the changes that the instructional designer is calling for are technically accurate. You probably won't have to do a whole lot with the additional audio tracks. Come down here, make sure that the narration text is technically accurate. And if you see any phonetic spellings in the narration audio, make sure that those are also accurate, so that if we have, say, the word ICAST, that the phonetic spelling is accurate for that acronym. And then go up here to the actions box, review the actions and make sure that they make sense. So for example, if we have an interaction in which the student is supposed to select a switch to turn on, say, a light, that the correct light is identified as the thing that's supposed to be turned on. And then finally, make sure you check your instructional designer's comments and answer those within the comment field here. So that's the instructional designer storyboard. You and the instructional designer are going to pass this particular storyboard back and forth a couple of times until you are satisfied that it is technically correct and your instructional designer is satisfied that it is instructionally valid, and then it will get sent on to production. Thanks so much, and we look forward to working with you on your storyboards.